and universities and businesses worldwide through retreats and seminars and one-on-one consultations. She has served as a business strategy presenter for numerous chambers of commerce in professional organizations, including an executive coach for the Black Enterprise Entrepreneurs Conference and the Black Enterprise Women of Power Summit. In addition to providing growth strategies for organizations, Lakeisha works with newly formed teams, fractured teams, and boards of directors to teach leadership and professional development strategies that enhance communication, increase emotional intelligence, and improve organizational effectiveness. As a former licensed financial advisor, Lakeisha is passionate about advocating for the economic empowerment of Black communities and the creation of generational wealth. She has a bachelor's degree from Vanderbilt University and is a graduate of the Campaign School at Yale University. She has completed the Meta, that's a Facebook community, accelerator cohort, the Fearless Fund Foundation's Get Venture Ready cohort, where she won second place in their pitch competition, and the Mecklenburg County Business Launchpad cohort. Currently, she's a member of the Proctor Conference's MICA cohort, yay, and the Goldman Sachs 1 Million Black Women, 1 Million Black Women, Black in Business cohort, the Charlotte Civic Leadership Academy, the Faith in Action inaugural Multi-Faith Solidarity cohort, and the Black Churches for Digital Equity Fellowship. She's a bad sister. She has a bachelor's degree from Vanderbilt University and a graduate of the Campaign School at Yale University. As a Forbes Coaches Council member, Lakeisha contributed more than 40 business tips to their expert panel forum. She is a founding member of the Newsweek Expert Forum, contributing articles on leadership and business trends. She is the published author, get this, of 20 books and host of the Courageous Conversations podcast. She has been featured in numerous publications and interviews, providing financial literacy tips, business advice, and community engagement strategies. You see why I say that when I grow up, I want to be just like her, because you don't even look old enough to have done all of that stuff. But we are delighted to have you here. As I just indicated, she is a member of one of our cohorts. We have what we call our MAKA cohort, where we deal with clergy persons dealing with financial challenges. It could be everybody dealing with financial challenges, because we all do. And I always say that at least in the Black community where I grew up, it might be different for y'all, but in the Black community where I grew up, there are two things you didn't talk about at the dinner table, and that was sex and money. And you need to talk about both of them. So she is here, Lakeisha is here to talk with us about building intergenerational wealth, which I think is powerful. That's the type of thing we talk about in the MICA cohort meetings. That's what our work is designed to do. And it's a conversation that we all need to have because of our theology, because of the way we were raised. Many times we don't even want to talk about money. It's like a bad word, but we need to talk about money, and we need to talk about wealth. We need to use that word. We need to understand what it is and build it. And Lakeisha, as you can see from her bio, she is equipped to handle this. So Lakeisha Womack, I want to say welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you, thank you. I'm happy to be with you all this evening.
I just when I read your bio, I'm serious. I'm really impressed with everything that you have done in such a short time. But I'm just glad that you're here, and I'm looking forward to us getting some nuggets that we all need to go forward. So let me just share this before we get into this conversation. Clergy persons often all right, most of us as people don't talk about money. Clergy persons talk about it even less. There's a perception that if you're a clergy person, then you have it all together because you're with God. I had a member when I was at my church, a member said, you don't need our help because you're married to God. I said, no, brother, that is not it. I am not married to God. And I have to pay my bills just like everybody else. But it is a fact that many clergy persons struggle with money. They struggle, and they don't want to tell their congregations about it. They're embarrassed. They're ashamed. If you can't afford to pay your mortgage or your rent, you're ashamed. If you can't afford to buy medicine for your kids, you're ashamed. The shame piece is really, really huge. And then there's also the faith conflict, because many people kind of succumb to that that feeling by congregational members that you should have it all together because you're with God. So that means that this conversation is very, very necessary. One of the books that I concentrated on, Lakeisha, for this evening is her book called Unlynched: An Economic Empowerment Doctrine for African Americans. I was intrigued by the title, which you chose for a very specific reason. So I wish that we would start this with you sharing with us how that came to be. How did you come up with this title? And I may ask you to read the Willie Lynch letter. We feel like we need to do that, but share with us how this came to be.
So yeah, well, thanks again for having me and to have this conversation, because I do agree that money is a topic that we don't talk about. And I learned so much about money being a financial advisor, and it just really opened my eyes to how much we don't know about money and how others have been using money, insurance, and different financial tools to generate wealth, whereas we've been kind of bootstrapping for, the past couple of 100 years. So that's one of the reasons why, I'm passionate about having a conversation. And that in no means that I have like all of my financial ducks in a row, because I'm struggling just like everyone else. But I do feel like, I should be doing better because I know better, but we know how that goes as well. But Unlynched was one of my friends posted the Willie Lynch letters on Facebook some years ago. It was probably around like 2014, 2015. And it struck me when I read it, because I realized like the strategies that they were talking about in the letter were things that we were actually seeing manifest in our society. And the basis of the letters was like, this guy, Willie Lynch, was saying, hey, slave masters in America, you're doing yourself a disservice by lynching your slaves, because if you would just manipulate them psychologically, you can control them for hundreds of years versus taking like your good property or your good workforce and killing them off, which, sounds like very, very brutal, which it was, but we think about the lynching and how brutal lynching was, but the psychological manipulation was even more brutal, because then they started to make the analogy of Black people as animals. And how do you control animals? And and I think like there's the one analogy that people use about the elephant, where if you tie a string to the elephant's leg, then the elephant will only move so far because it will become conditioned that that's the only distance that it can go. And in some ways, like our communities have been conditioned by things that were embedded into our community mindset during the enslavement period that we're still trying to unlynch ourselves from. And so that was the basis for writing the letter, not to present, I have all the answers, but just to point out some of the things that were in the letter. And people debate whether or not the letter is true or not. And I say it doesn't matter if it's true, because the effects that were discussed in the letter you can see in today's society. So my goal with the book was to provide a space where people could have conversation and to really think hey, why is this happening in our community? And is it deeper than just what we see on the surface?
It's powerful. When I saw the word unlynched, I just said, "Ooh, goodness!" And I'm just glad you wrote it. Do you happen to have the book in front of you with the letter?
I do not. I have some downstairs, but
That's okay. I came ready. I'm a Girl Scout. I'm good. Because I know about the Willie Lynch letter, but I am sure that there is somebody listening or watching that doesn't know about the Willie Lynch letter. So if you would kind of oblige me for a couple of minutes, I'm going to read it so that anybody who's listening will know exactly what you're talking about. Is that okay? Okay. It says, "Gentlemen, I greet you here on the bank of the James River in the year of our Lord 1712. First, I shall thank you, the gentlemen of the colony of Virginia, for bringing me here. I am here to help you solve some of your problems with slaves. Your invitation reached me on my modest plantation in the West Indies, where I have experimented with some of the newest and still the oldest methods for control of slaves." Every time I read this, even though I've read it 100 times, I get mad. Ancient Rome's would envy us if my program is implemented. As our boat sailed south on the James River, named for our illustrious king, whose version of the Bible we cherish, I saw enough to know that your problem is not unique. While Rome used cords of wood as crosses for standing human beings along its highways in great numbers, you are here using the tree and the rope on occasions. I caught the whiff of a dead slave hanging from a tree a couple miles back. You are not only losing valuable stock by hangings, you are having uprisings. Slaves are running away. Your crops are sometimes left in the fields too long for maximum profit. You suffer occasional fires. Your animals are killed. Gentlemen, you know what your problems are. I do not need to elaborate. I am not here to enumerate your problems. I am here to introduce you to a method of solving them. In my bag here, I have a foolproof method for controlling your Black slaves. I guarantee every one of you that if installed correctly, it will control the slaves for at least 300 years. My method is simple. Any member of your family or your overseer can use it. I have outlined a number of differences among the slaves and make the differences bigger. I use fear, distrust, and envy for control. These methods have worked on my modest plantation in the West Indies, and it will work throughout the South. Take this simple little list of differences and think about them. On top of my list is age, but it is only there because it starts with an A. The second is color or shade. There is intelligence, size, sex, size of plantations and status on plantations, attitude of owners, whether the slaves live in the valley or on a hill, east, west, north, south, have fine hair, coarse hair, or is tall or short. Now that you have a list of differences, I shall give you an outline of action. But before I do that, I shall assure you that distrust is stronger than trust, and envy stronger than adulation, respect, or admiration. The Black slaves, after receiving this indoctrination, shall carry on and will become self-refueling and self-generating for you for hundreds of years, maybe thousands. Don't forget, you must pitch the old Black male versus the young Black male, the young Black male against the old Black male. You must use the dark-skinned slaves versus the light-skinned slaves, and the light-skinned slaves versus the dark-skinned slaves. You must use female versus the male, and male versus the female. You must also have your white servants and overseers distrust all Blacks. It is necessary that your slaves trust and depend on us. Let me read that again. It is necessary that your slaves trust and depend on us. It is necessary. They must love and respect and trust us only. Gentlemen, these kits are your keys to control. Use them. Have your wives and children use them. Never miss an opportunity. If used intensely for 1 year, the slaves themselves will remain perpetually distrustful of each other. Thank you, Jen. I can see why I made you write something, because when you read it, it just does something to you. But what it reminds me of is a statement that I always go back to that was said by Brian Stevenson, who was the executive director, founder and executive director of the Equal Justice Initiative, one of the most powerful things I've ever heard. He said slavery never ended, it just evolved.
It did.
And I think the reason it has evolved, and you talk to me, how does what Brian said fit into how you have developed this economic strategy for us as African Americans?
Well, I think that, even though we're not in physical bondage anymore, now we're economic slaves. And so that's what toward the end of the book, it talks about the making of an economic slave and how in our community, we've been conditioned to be consumers and not investors. And so many people, even though we're walking around as if we're free, we're in bondage to credit card, we're in bondage to debt. Like there's so many instruments that we've become in bondage to because we're trying to live this standard of life that is not fitting of where we are financially. And it goes back to what you were talking about, not having conversations about money, not talking about savings and investing and budgeting. And so when you see, and I think that desegregation was one of the worst things that happened to our community. Like people can fight me if you want, I don't care. But I think that when we started going into other communities and seeing what they had and wanting to aspire to the goals that they were living when we already did not have the assets and the resources to live that lifestyle. And then, you can look at the history of like how credit cards came to be, how, with redlining and mortgages, like those instruments were created to put people in debt because now you're a slave to the banks, you're a slave to interest rates. And so when you see people that can't take vacations, that can't, leave a job or move to a different city if they want to because they don't have the financial means, that's a means of being enslaved.
It really is. It makes me think of, so I used to watch this program, the 600-pound, My 600-Pound Life.
Yeah.
So I would watch it. And then what I would notice is that the commercials that they would show were all fast food commercials.
Mm-hmm.
So, and now they've enacted gambling here in Ohio. You can do it. Now the commercials are all gambling. And then at the end, they put a tagline on there. If you have a gambling problem, call da 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 da. But when you're getting ready to go out and gamble, you're not going to call anybody.
Right. They've already sold you.
They've already sold you. And I said, I was talking with a friend today, and I said, this thing that we do, we spend money that we don't have. If you have to use a credit card, you don't have the money. You don't have the money. But we spend it because we are enamored with things. And I said today to a friend of mine, I said, I think capitalism is a drug.
Oh, yeah.
I think we are addicted. The addiction that we have to spending money, which is, the whole purpose of capitalism, is as toxic and as murderous as an addiction to drugs or alcohol. Do you believe that? Would you take issue with that?
I definitely believe it. And I think that, our system has been set up for us to become a part of the capitalistic cog. And I think that in some ways it's even worse in the church because I see it as, we've become capitalistic Christians in some sense, where there's more focus on money and the acquisition of property and the acquisition of stuff than actually serving the community. So we become so consumed with having more and more and more. And I always tell people, like, you'll never have enough because they're always going to make a new model television. They're always going to make a new model car. They're always going to make a new model because it keeps us wanting more. Like there's a store that I shop at, I shop online, and every day, like they send me at least 5 emails. And it's like, oh, we have a new dress and we have a new cardigan and you want this. And it's like, I look at my closet and I have enough. But because they keep sending the message and they keep reinforcing, don't you want more? Don't you want more? It is like a drug. And for people who, especially if you're suffering from depression or, if you're having like any type of, low self-esteem, then you find like spending money sometimes gives you like that adrenaline boost, like, oh, I feel better for a moment because I just bought something. And for some people, it's food. Like, I can go out and buy more food. I can go out and buy more clothes. I can go buy more shoes. I can go buy more knickknacks, like the people on Hoarders Buried Alive, where they have just like all this stuff. And usually the psychologist will come in and it's because they're trying to fill some void. And I think that that's where capitalism kind of like sneaks in because it knows that there are some, mental illnesses and some psychological trauma that we're all dealing with. And they're like, well, if you just buy this TV, then all your hurts will go away. If you just buy this new car, then you're going to look good. So you're going to feel good. And so it does put us in this trap where we're constantly trying to buy more stuff to feel better on the inside.
You're right. And I have come to, I mutter to myself a lot of times that the money is more important to many of us than God is, even though we be going to church and, but money and things, money and stuff is more important to us than it's God. I just read an article maybe an hour ago where that guy, Joel Osteen, has a house that's worth, I don't know how many millions of dollars and 20 cars with a 20-car garage. What do you need all that for? You can't drive but one, but we are seduced by it. So I always go back to one of the most irritating commercials for me comes at Christmas time when, you have the nice little family and a nice house and, somebody's got a surprise and you go outside and there's this Lexus with a bow on it. And I'm thinking that, that just, gets to people who don't feel like they're like they matter. They don't feel like, but I can get me a car. So it's, and I used to think when people would come to church and they give a testimony, I got a new car, and they'd be running around the church and everybody, and I'd be sitting there thinking, boy, I hope you can pay that note when it comes. That's the thing that we need to be. And I'm going to let you talk because you do this, but I think we need to be more about saving and investing than spending. We are concerned with spending. So we're keeping wealthy people wealthy. That ought to make us mad, don't you think?
And I think that, there's nothing wrong with buying the stuff, but it's like you said, it's when you haven't done the foundational things yet. And so, if you are, spending like thousands of dollars on a Mercedes, which that's your prerogative, but you haven't bought a house. And some people are like, well, I don't want to buy a house. I don't want home ownership. But then you have to think like long term, because owning a house is not just about owning a house today, but what happens when you're 60 or you're 70, where are you going to live? because you don't want to still be paying rent when you should be in retirement age. And a lot of people don't think about it like that. And now that, interest rates have gotten higher, the housing market is just ridiculous. Home ownership is not even a possibility for so many people. And so my concern is for all these people who are stuck renting, what's going to happen when you reach retirement and one, you haven't saved any money. And so if you think about just like basic math, if you retire at 65, let's say you live to 85, that's 20 years. If you're only living on $25,000 a year, which is not a lot of money, that's $500,000 that you're going to have to come up with from somewhere just to be able to retire and stay retired. And with that 24,000, that means that if you haven't bought a house, you're going to have to pay rent somewhere. If you're used to driving a luxury car, then you're probably going to need to replace that car at least 1 or 2 times during that 20 years, or are you just not going to go anywhere anymore? So there are like some real decisions that people need to make early about what do I want my life to look like, not just in the next 5 years, but in the next 20 or 30 years. And even if you buy a house and you don't want to live in it, then you could rent it out or, have like family members that might need somewhere to stay that can live it. Like there's so many strategies that we can use that can also set us up for success in the future, but we're only kind of thinking about the right now and what I want right now. And the Louis Vuitton bags, if you don't have a retirement fund, I guarantee you when you're like 65 and you're looking at all those bags in the closet, like you can't sell them and get what you paid for them. And then you're going to be trying to figure out, all right, so how do I live? And then you're going to be competing in the workforce against like a younger generation, which we see a lot of right now, where you have people who are, trying to get jobs that they're just not, technologically savvy for. And we're moving to like AI. So, are you prepared for like those types of jobs? And I don't even imagine what it's going to be like 20 years from now when I get to 65. So it's like so much that we have to think about. And that's where financial planning comes in. There may be uncomfortable conversations, but how do you start thinking about 20, 30 years from now and putting a little bit aside for the future, but then you can also spend a little bit now. You have to be able to do both.
Right. And I think that we talking to somebody and said, just whenever and we didn't talk about this. We didn't, in my house, we didn't talk about this. Such a part of my DNA, as were the lessons that my mama taught me, like don't wear white before Memorial Day and after Labor Day. That's in my spirit. That's not going anywhere. But we didn't talk about this kind of stuff. But I'm sure if we had conversations every night about when you get a job, you need to dun because we didn't talk about it. And so I have not lived a very wise financial life. Let me just say that I have learned as I have gone along. But many people don't get there. They don't get there. And what I worry about, Lakeisha, maybe you can talk about this with the political situation as it is and all the things that they're trying to do. I'm not quite sure what this country is going to look like in a couple of years. It's very scary to me. I'm not sure. And I know that when political systems have changed in the past in other countries, lots of people end up homeless. They end up out in the streets. And I don't think our people in this country are really thinking about that. Do you think I'm on the right track? Do you think that's an issue for us?
Oh, most definitely. But I do want to go back to, our parents not instilling a lot of these lessons in us. Like a lot of them didn't know.
Well,
So
they didn't. They didn't think about it.
Right. When I was working with American Express, one of their mottos was like, we've been helping people build wealth for hundreds of years. And when they said that, it really it hit my heart, because I remember my grandmother buying a burial policy. And I remember the insurance man coming to her house every week to collect however much she was paying on this burial policy. But it was really only enough insurance to bury her. Whereas you have companies like American Express that were selling life insurance in quantities that would allow, if something happened to the person, that would allow them to pay off their farm, to send their kids to college, to live to not have to worry about money anymore. Whereas in the Black community, a lot of times we were only buying burial policies. So it was just enough to get you in the ground, but then the kids would have to come back home to help out, mom or dad with the house, or they would have to sell the house because there wasn't enough money to do anything after getting them in the ground. So from that standpoint, we already, are behind the curveball. And then when you add on the fact that we were kind of bootstrapping everything. So even, with my mom, She was a single mom for a long time and having to, do the best that she could with her 2 jobs that she was working to take care of her 2 kids and her parents. Like she didn't have time to think strategically about what to do with money. And so she was one of those that, like, my mom's a spender. So like if she's in a bad mood, like it makes her feel good to spend money. And a lot of that was because of the trauma that she was not able to deal with. And having a little extra money was like, you know what, I'm going to go buy myself something nice because I deserve it for all of the stuff that I've had to deal with through the week. So if on Saturday, I go buy myself a new dress or a new purse, that's my way of rewarding myself. But, a lot of times we weren't thinking, but what if, we're investing that extra $50? What if we're putting that into an insurance policy? Because we were dealing with so much trauma, we're just trying to make ourselves feel a little bit better. We can't even get to the part about, all right, how do I stabilize my situation? So I think that, that's one of the things that we have to be honest about, that a lot of our parents couldn't have those conversations because they didn't even know what the conversation was that needed to be had. And so today, that's why it's important that we start having these conversations and just start being real. Like, I think my car is like a 2012. It's paid for. Would I love to have a new car? Would I love to go and, get, a new C-Class? Like, I would absolutely love that. But then when I think about a new car payment, like, is it worth it for me to accumulate that extra debt? Because there are other things that I want to do with my resources right now. And so we just have to start thinking more strategically, because as you said, the political environment definitely is going to affect our community, whether we want to admit it or not. It's definitely going to affect us more than it already has. Just mentioning with the housing crisis right now, it was already difficult for people to buy a house. Now with interest rates rising, it's even more difficult. And when you think about the cost of houses going up, so if you want to buy, let's say just $100,000 house, which I don't know where we're going to find $100,000 house in most parts of the country. And if they want a 10% down payment, that's $10,000 that you need to come to the table with. If you're trying to get a 20% down payment so that you don't have to pay PMI or mortgage insurance, that's $20,000. That's just on $100,000 house. Most houses are in the $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 range if you have a family. So you start asking yourself, well, where am I going to come up with $20,000, $40,000, $60,000 to be able to pay for a down payment on a house?
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy, and people don't think like that. And so we're struggling, and I think we're putting ourselves in danger. And that's why I think that this capitalism, it's an addiction. It's an addiction. People who do drugs or alcohol, they go after that stuff, even though they know they should not. And we spend money even when we know we shouldn't be spending it, just because we want to feel better. We just want to feel better. I'm reminded of how many people in the course of my being a pastor, how many people came, mama and them died, they didn't have a penny. You hear what I'm saying?
Yeah.
They didn't have a penny to bury him. And so we, have to do a church offering or something so they could bury them. But then this is the thing. This is where that addiction to money and capitalism kicks in. They would say, so we want to get one of them limousines.
Mm-hmm. And that's the perception of wealth that we've become enamored with, where even though I don't have it, I still want to look like money. And I'll never forget, I was going to this reception with like these venture capitalists, and I was trying to decide, like, what am I going to wear? And I was like, I'm just not in the mood. I'm just going to put on some flats and go to this, this event. And most of the people there were, extremely wealthy because, they're investing in these businesses. And if you look at them, you wouldn't be able to tell that they were extremely wealthy. And then you think about other events that you go to where that people don't have wealth, but because we've been caught up in looking like, if we look presentable enough, then that will keep us from danger, which is one of the issues that came out of, slavery and into Jim Crow. If we look presentable and if we look like, we're respectable, then that will prevent us from being in danger. even though we see now like that's not even a factor, but we've taken that on in so many ways where it's like now we feel like we have to look like money because then people will respect us and people will treat us better, when really like they don't care anything about us. The only thing they respect is green.
That's
And
right.
so if you walk into a room, it doesn't matter if you have on red bottoms, if you don't have anything in your bank account, you're still not going to get the level of respect that you're aspiring to, because they respect green. Money is power in this country.
And
And
that's
that's
one of the things you
kept
said
us.
in your book. The colors, we always think about black and white. Yeah, you think about black and white, but also about green. Because if you
Right.
don't think about green, you're not going to be able to get anywhere.
Exactly. And that's how they keep us from having access to power, because we focus on the illusion or the image of power and success, and not what does real success look like. And real success looks like having wealth, and wealth is when you have money that will last for generations, not just enough money for you today or for you and your kids, but have you set yourself up for future generations to still be able to live off of the resources that you're accumulating. That's what is respected in this country.
Absolutely. Talk to us. So you use the word wealth, and most of us, many of us in our communities, I don't think use that word. It's like so far away. It's beyond us. It's like God being transcendent. We don't talk about it, but it's right here. We can achieve wealth. But please talk to us about wealth. Define it and talk about how we develop it.
So wealth has to be a strategy. It's not something that you accumulate overnight unless you win the lottery or something miraculous happens. But that's one of the advantages of working with a financial planner. And I think especially, when you're younger, sitting down with a financial planner when you're first starting your job, because the time value of money essentially says that when you start out earlier, you can save less because you have more time for that money to grow. And so you don't have to take as much risk, or if you take risk, like you have time to recover. Whereas a lot of people don't really get it, or it doesn't start clicking until their 40s or maybe their 50s. And now you're closer to retirement. So you can't take a lot of risk, which is what will get you to the reward. So you're having to be more conservative with your investments. But if we encourage young people, when you first get your job, sit down with the financial planner, figure out how much you need to start saving so that you can retire at some point, so that you can buy a house at some point, making sure that you're buying life insurance, making sure that you have disability income. As you start to get older, start thinking about long-term care insurance. What do you want to have happen if you can no longer live in your home? Instead of, not putting it in a trust or in a vehicle where it can pass along and you don't have to worry about your children or your grandchildren selling it. What are some estate planning tips that you can utilize so that you protect those assets? So there's so many little decisions that can have a major impact in future generations that we just don't really have, but we need to start having those conversations. Those need to be more workshops that we're doing in our churches about, how do we create wealth? So it's not just about, let me go start a business or, let me, save some, but how do we really create strategies for wealth based on what you have? How do you multiply that? How do you invest it? How do you use different financial tools? Even life insurance has investment aspects that some people are using as a wealth generation tool. So many strategies out there. I'm not licensed to give advice any more specifically, but I can talk in general terms. But I just want you all to know that there are strategies out there. There are professionals who can help you with your specific situation. And no matter how dire it may feel or it may seem, if you just decide to make different decisions, you can get out of it.
That's so powerful. I mean, because again, I go back to the shame that, clergy persons feel. Oh, I don't make enough money to. We don't have time to be ashamed. I think that it's estimated that I forget by which year that Black people will not have any wealth in this country at all.
Yeah.
And we have to know that date is and what that means. You wrote something in your book that I think is very powerful. You said that having wealth means that we have the power to invest and no longer rely on government programs to feed our children, build our schools, purchase homes, fund our nonprofits, and do what we must do to optimize our communities. For those who are hearing something tonight that is resonating with them, what are some of the first steps that they can take toward being unlynched? I just thought that that just we don't have to depend on you. We don't have to, that would be like the biggest bust, wouldn't it? We don't need your little food stamps. How about that? We don't need it because we are becoming, what is that? Kujichagulia. We are living in the spirit of self-determination, Ojama, cooperative economics, all of that. But do you think most people understand what you just wrote and what you wrote? And do you think that people believe that they can attain that?
No.
No.
I'm sure answer no. But I think that, the problem is deeper because it goes back to the distrust that's been embedded in our communities. So a lot of times the shame is shame because we don't trust anyone to be honest with about our situation, because we don't want to take off the mask and say, hey, like my finances are a mess and I need help, because of the distrust that's been built into the community. And so a lot of times, like, people will go to, which, like, if you think about it, so like I look at things and it's just like, make it make sense. So if you think about all the professional athletes that have gone through the NBA and the NFL, why don't we have more Black millionaires and billionaires? And it's because those leagues were sanctioning who could be their financial advisors. Like, you would have to go through the league to be approved to work with these athletes. So my thinking is, so if you all have this list of approved people who can work with them and manage their money, then obviously something is happening, because more of these athletes are not making good financial decisions.
Right.
So is that intentional? Like, and it makes me wonder, like, how many Black financial advisors are in that pipeline that are advising these athletes how to manage their money? Because a lot of them, when they are successful and they give back to their communities, are able to have a tremendous impact in their communities. But you imagine, like, but why aren't more of them having like that same impact? And so we have to look at who's advising us, who's giving us information about how to spend our money. And sometimes just because they're a financial advisor, that doesn't mean that they're giving you good advice about how to invest in your community. How do you have an impact in your community? How do you, LeBron James is one of the, I think, models for, the school that he's developed, the way he's been, enveloping it, investing in young people, the way he's been giving back and using his wealth, not just to secure his family. Doesn't mean he can't have nice things, but he's also looking at, well, how can I ensure that other people have opportunity and economic mobility? A few years ago, I was in Chicago and did a workshop, and it was around Unleashed. I think it was around the time that the book came out. And there was a young lady who came up to me and she said, I was about to get a bonus from work and I was going to buy a Gucci bag, but God placed it on my heart to start a scholarship at my church. And the morning of the scholarship, the pastor reached out to me and he said, hey, we just had the scholarship lunch and just wanted to let you know that the amount of the scholarship that she gave to this young man was how much he was about to lose in a Pell Grant. And so we think that it has to be these big gestures to have an impact in our community. But sometimes it's just thinking like, hey, if I'm going to get a $1,500 bonus, then yeah, I'll take $750 and do something fun or take a vacation. But I'm also going to take $750 and invest it in a nonprofit that I know is doing tremendous work in the community, or, send it to a food bank, or just $250. Like, we don't even think about the impact that just making those small investments in our community organizations can have, because they're doing the work and changing the trajectory. But we're waiting on someone else to give them a grant or to come in and fund them. So a lot of our organizations that are trying to support our communities are underfunded because we're not funding them.
Right.
I look at churches that have been around, and it breaks my heart, churches that have been around for, 130, 150 years. And you think about enslaved people taking the pennies that they had, the small resources that they had to build these institutions. And now we have more resources than they could ever imagine, and we can't even maintain the structures. Because we're so focused on the individual capitalism, me getting more, me having a bigger house, me having a nicer car, me having more stuff, that we can't even uphold the institutions that our ancestors sacrificed to make sure that we have.
Yeah, and they had nothing compared to what we have. And with nothing, they did all of that. That's just such a good point that you're making.
because they were more focused on community and making sure
Yes.
that everyone had a place. So the church being in existence and being nice was more important because that's where we come together. It
Right.
wasn't just a personal home, but it was making sure that we all had a place where we felt safe and we had community. And now going back to your point about capitalism tells us, no, it's not about community. It's about you making sure that you've got enough.
Individualism. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's what it's about. And so if you don't have it, ain't nobody else gonna have it. Which is the exact antithesis of what community is. It's like, I know in our neighborhood growing up, if one person had food, everybody had food.
Right.
If one, if you needed, you know how it was, you could go to somebody's house and mama says she needs 2 eggs, here, baby, you take 3. She might need 3. If my mother knew that, we had some Catholics that lived on our streets and they had a bunch of kids. And my mother on Sunday, that was the favorite dinner. And she would, we would want to save the leftovers for ourselves. So she wouldn't let us. She'd say, take this down to Miss Shelton's house. And oh, what? But that's community. And that's why we, I think, survived.
Right.
The community kept us alive. And that was building wealth. Was it you that said integration was the worst thing that happened? Are you the person that said that to me today?
Yes. Desegregation.
Explain that.
Well, I just feel, and, I just feel that when we were, educating our own children,
Yep.
banking with each other, going to see our own doctors, because we, look at, healthcare providers and how, Black women are not getting access to the care that they need. A lot of that is because we're not going to healthcare providers that look like us. When we think about going to banks, not being able to get loans, not being able to get, mortgages, it's because we don't have banks that look like us. When we think about, teachers, not wanting to teach like the history of, Black America, is because we don't have schools that educate our children. And so for all the advancements that desegregation, allowed us to make in society, we also have to look at the cost of that. And the cost for a lot of our communities has been those resources being taken from our communities and not only going into other communities, but going into communities where those resources aren't even valued. So now you have, Black professionals who are, again, experiencing different levels of trauma, just trying to exist in organizations that were not designed for them to be successful, because we took away the opportunity for them to practice their profession in spaces where they could be affirmed and where their services were needed.
Yeah, I think that's such a powerful point. The communities that we did have, I remember visiting my cousins who lived down in Birmingham, Alabama, and they lived in a rural, I'm gonna call it a rural part of the city, where we live, sidewalks, all that kind of stuff. But it was family. And and it was like the whole block was full of family. It was just family. Yeah. And so you knew that you had, number one, you had love, which you absolutely need, and you had each other. And so you didn't have to go through anything by yourself. But financially, if Miss Pickens couldn't pay her rent, then Miss Jones would help her. And it was that type of, if she could, I mean, it might not be Miss Jones, but if Miss Jones didn't have it, she'd find somebody. So the point is that we took care of each other. And that, again, was building wealth. I had a conversation several years ago, when I was working with the Poor People's Campaign, and they kept saying, yeah, we're going to help the poor people, the ones who are, they don't have enough money. And I just stopped them. I said, can we just have a redefinition of poverty? I said, to me, wealth is when you can go to sleep tonight at night. You don't worry about being evicted the next day. You don't worry about somebody taking your car, and that you can breathe easily because you don't have creditors. But that's a form of wealth. It's much deeper, and I want you to talk about that. But in terms of poverty, people don't understand that if you cannot pay your mortgage on time, you're poor.
Right.
You are poor. If you can't pay the car, not the one you ran around the church for, because you were glad, because God bless me, hallelujah. But you can't pay the car. No, you are poor. And so I think that we live with rose-colored glasses or something, and we don't want to see poverty, our own poverty, for what it is. And so we keep doing the same old thing that makes us more poor. Am I on track? Am I on track? Talk to me.
Most definitely. And I think that, we have to reimagine what community looks like in our current context. So how do we now build community where it's not just we have to go and take care of the people who are in poverty, but how do we take care of each other holistically? Because I think that so often, we want to take care of people who we consider to be poor or in poverty without thinking about all right, but how do we address the mindset issue that is really the culprit? So I tell this story often. There was a young lady who came to me. She's probably 8 years old. And she said, Miss Womack, is it true that the more babies I have, the more money I'll get? And I had to think about it. And I was like, well, actually, yeah, it is true. And I had to explain to her how the welfare system worked and how it was designed to keep her from getting a job and becoming financially stable, because as long as she continued to have children, she would get more benefits from the government. And I'm proud to say, this young lady's in her 20s now with no children. Because we haven't had those conversations with people that we consider to be poor or in poverty about, but how is the system designed to keep you in this cycle? And then what can we do to help get you out of the cycle? Because we know that it's not as simple as, go get a better job, because there are job skills that some people do not have that would allow them to get a better job. There's, a lot of times if people start making more money, they get kicked off the system, and there's no bridge that says, okay, if you get kicked off the system, we can provide you assistance for 3 months until you get to the point where you're self-sufficient. So we're saying, hey, go pull yourself up by your bootstraps, not thinking, well, at some point that bootstrap is going to break. And are we there with another pair of bootstraps to help you until you can go buy your own? So we have to reimagine, what does it really look like to help build community so that we can get to the point of building wealth? And that's where that mindset comes in, because we have our own internal biases against people that we consider poor and what we think they deserve and the type of help that they deserve. Even when I hear people saying, well, if they're on food stamps, they shouldn't be able to buy certain foods. But why? Right. If that's what they want to eat, why shouldn't they be able to buy those foods? Because them buying the foods that you think that they don't deserve is not the issue. The issue is, why do we have so many people in our communities who need to have food benefits, because we haven't done the work to help them become sufficient so that they can buy their own groceries. Right. I know people love the backpack giveaways, y'all rock out with the backpack giveaways. But my thinking is, but what parent doesn't want to buy school supplies for their own children? So what are we doing to increase the financial literacy and the financial capacity so that, this year you came to get backpack, school supplies, Thanksgiving dinner, but next year our goal is that you will be in a better position financially so that you don't need the system. We shouldn't be saying well, this year we gave away 100 and next year we're going to give away 200. That means there are more people in need. Our goal should be, we gave away 100 this year, but next year we only need to give away 50, because we help some of those families to improve their financial situation so that they don't need a handout anymore.
Yeah, you talked about financial freedom in your book, and you defined it. You say it means that you can afford to take a vacation without a credit card, and that you have the savings necessary for a down payment on a house or a car. It means that you can quit a job that isn't fulfilling and have at least 3 months to find another job. It means you can send your children to college without taking out student loans. And you write that unlynching ourselves from the systemic oppression that exists within the American culture requires wealth. And it's exactly what you were talking about. If you have to use a credit card, you don't have money, period. Right. You just don't have the money. And if you don't have the money at the moment you use the credit card, your problem comes time to pay that bill. And that's when the harassment starts and all that. So we're addicted to things, Martin Luther King, military materialism, and whatever the other one was. But we are addicted to having things. You mentioned your car's a 2012. Mine's a 2011 Toyota Avalon. It is fine. It's going to be fine. I pray on that thing. Don't rattle. Don't do nothing. I'm not trying. But new cars out there, so fun. Aren't they fun?
They are fun.
Get in a new car and they got all these bells and whistles. And I mean, some people like to drive a new car because they like the way I've heard people say, I like the way I look at it, and then, in the hood, you're driving through. I like the smell of a new car and I like all the new stuff in there, but I'm not paying no car note. I'm not doing it. I'm just not going to do it because you don't know what is going to happen in your life that's going to make you need them that you are on for something that you really did not need to have. So when I think about it, if you talk about financial advisors, and many people don't have them, they don't even know what to look for in a financial advisor. Pastors need financial advisors just like we need therapists. I'm saying we just really need it. What are signs, Lakeisha, of a good financial planner?
So a good financial planner is going to start with your budget. So one of the red flags for me, if you go to work with someone and the first thing they start talking about is investments, then that's probably not the financial advisor for you unless you're going to someone who works specifically with like wealth. So there are like wealth advisors and there are financial advisors. And so if you're not in a position where, you're financially stable, you don't need to invest in investments from out of the gate. Like the first thing you need to do is make sure that you have a solid budget. And the reason that I say that is because once you start buying investments, typically you have to sell those investments to get your money back. And so if you don't have a good budget, then the probability that you're going to need that money is very high. And so you'll end up buying an investment, which is going to cost you a fee. But then when you need the money, you're going to end up having to sell it. And if the market is down, then you could lose money. So then it's like all this extra layers of stuff that happens. So a good financial advisor is going to look at your budget, help you to identify how much can you comfortably afford to invest and save. They're going to make sure that you have a good saving strategy first. So before you invest, you need to make sure that you have a nest egg. So that's money that if there's an emergency tomorrow, that you can access those funds without incurring a fee. So they're going to help you to develop a strategy and not just say, oh yeah, you have like $200, like let's start investing that money, not knowing what your complete financial situation looks like.
Yeah, that's real important because you say it's like, all right, everybody who says they can sing can't sing. Everybody who's an internist is not a good internist, and everybody who says he or she is a financial advisor is not a good financial advisor. So I'm appreciative of you pointing out the red flags. And also, you said something about saving. I think that one of the keys to having wealth or to building wealth, because we're talking about intergenerational wealth, we start where we are, we pass it on to our children, so they'll pass it on to their children. Whoever's gone already, we can't do anything about that, but we can start where we are today. I think no matter how old we are, we can start with what we have, but be teaching the lessons that we're learning to our children, so they'll teach it to their children and so forth. But when we talk about building wealth, it's like anything else. It requires a lifestyle change. People, if you want to lose weight, all right, you can't keep eating macaroni and cheese and fried chicken. You can't.
Oh, don't say that.
Come on, you can't do that. You got to do something different.
Right.
And it might be a gradual, taper off. Maybe you eat fried chicken 4 days a week and you taper it down to 4. I know I love fried chicken. That's why I'm using that example. When it comes to building wealth, we have to change instead of when we get, like when we're kids, as soon as we get money, it's like, remember your parents would say, it's like burning your hands. It is. I'm going to go up there and buy me some candy. Sometimes it wasn't even candy that I liked, but I wanted to spend it.
Right.
This building wealth, I think, requires lifestyle change. It's just changing your habits. Yeah. Eating is a habit, right? You learn that when you fast. I learned that when I fasted. I learned that when I come in, I used to fast like the whole Holy Week, the whole week, starting on the day after Palm Sunday, and I would go all the way through Holy Saturday. And I would come in the house on Monday. You go to sleep. That's not a big deal. But when you get up and you go out and come back, you realize that you have a pattern. So you come in, you take your shoes off one place, you and you go to the refrigerator. And so I really realized that was my pattern. So I had to change my pattern, and that was irritating. But it's a habit. What we do, how we eat, how we do that. Not saving money is a habit.
Yeah. And a lot of people think that they can't afford to save. And so two things that I said, like one, keep a journal for 30 days and write down every dollar that you spend. And by the end of those 30 days, like you'll see that there are some little, because when we make our budgets, we typically make our budgets and only consider like the big stuff, like, how much is my rent, how much is my car payment, car insurance. We don't account for, oh, let me stop at the gas station and pick up this. Oh, let me stop at CVS and pick up this. Like, we don't account for like those little things that we are spending money on. And that's what typically erodes our budget, because we'll normally like budget to zero. So it's like, all right, if I'm bringing in, $5,000 for the month, and I got to spend like all the money. And so you get to zero. But then when you have these other expenses, then it's like, oh man, I don't have enough money, so I can't pay off the credit card. I don't have enough money, so I can't pay this bill. So you end up with a late fee. And so it becomes a cycle. So that's why it's important to figure out like, where's the money going? And then you can start to say like, all right, I need to be more conscious of how I spend money. I keep track of like every dollar that I spend, like whether I'm doing a good job spending or not, like I at least know where the money is going. But then I also do like automatic savings. So before like I even see the money, like it goes into a separate savings account. And you would be surprised like how much money you can save when you can't see it. And if you know you have a problem, then rather than having it go to a savings account that's attached to your checking account, have it go to a savings account at a totally separate bank that you don't have a debit card access to, that you would have to physically go to that bank to get access to that money. Like sometimes we have to discipline ourselves in order to make better decisions.
Yeah, and it is right. If you never see it, it's amazing.
Yeah.
If you don't see it, you don't miss it. When you
Right.
see it, oh, I can't do without it. But if you don't see it, you adjust.
Yeah.
And you make it. I used to remember, I remember when I was in church, they talk about tithing and give it off the top. If you're not used to doing that, then it's like, oh no. And I went through all types of machinations trying to teach people how to tithe. It's not that big a deal. 1/10, I put 10 jars down. 1/10 just this one little jar. That's good and all, Reverend Sue, but they would not do it because they were afraid that they could not. So doing what you're doing puts it down in black and white. And it lets you see it. Once you see it, then it helps you. You say, oh, shoot, I need to stop doing da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And you realize we frivolously, we don't even think about it. We spend money frivolously because it's there, because we are consumers and not investors and savers. And I think what you're talking about is that we have to move from being consumers to being investors and savers.
Yeah. And I think also, making sure that those savings dollars have a name, because if you know that like, all right, my goal is to save $10,000 because I want to buy a house. That's different than saying, oh, I'm just going to save some money, because now it's like kind of arbitrary. Like, well, if I save it, I save it. If I don't, I don't, because it doesn't really have a purpose. But if you know that there's a goal for what you're trying to save for, then you're much more likely to stick with it. And we do have a question from David. So many people in my generation, including friends, are unprepared for retirement. What should we do for one another? And I think that that's one of those things where we're really going to have to start thinking like creatively about what is retirement going to look like. So, one thing that churches that have, extra property, they can look at, how do you maybe start to build some tiny homes communities where, people who are, becoming seniors and may not have a place to live or can't afford to continue paying rent, where you have like a community that they can come, like a retirement community that they can live in. Because the reality is like there are a lot of people who have not bought houses, who do not have adequate savings, that are going to need a place to live. And the housing market is just not in a place where, if you are not already on the path to home ownership and you're in your 40s, 50s, it's going to be really hard in the next 10 or 20 years, just with the way the economic trends are going, to be able to buy a house. Unless like you decide that, for you, retirement looks like, I want to go live in like a small town and I just want to sit on the porch and, watch the cars drive by. Then yeah, you can go to a small rural community and probably buy a house for like $30,000, $50,000, like, remodel it and, live there, and then maybe spend like your extra money traveling to bigger cities if you want. But I think the biggest thing is like people are going to have some real conversations with themselves about where do I see myself in the next 20 years? What does retirement look like? And then what decisions do I need to start making today? Because if you wait until you get to retirement, it's going to be too late because your options, every year, your options get smaller and smaller for what you can do. And the amount of money that it's going to take to make the same decision next year as it would take today is going to be much more.
Yeah, and see, we don't like to think about that because it's scary. It's like we don't like to think about death, and we don't like to think about the funeral that we are going to have, either for ourselves or for members of our family. We don't want to do any of that. And by not doing that, we just cause ourselves and our families, just undue misery. We don't have to live that way. I think that when it comes to clergy persons and church people, part of the reason that we make we don't want to talk about money, we just don't want to talk about it. But part of it is because of the way I think we've been taught, money is the root of all evil. That's what we were taught. That's not what it says, but money is, it's the love of money. We see that going on in the world now. All these people love money. They love them some money. They don't love us, but they love the money.
Right.
The love of money is a root of all evil. So we don't want to talk about it. So we live with a theology of lack, as opposed to the theology of sufficiency, which is what we base our MICA program and resource development on. Talk to us about what that means to you, theology of sufficiency, because I think it's important for church people to understand this big time.
And I think, it's the scarcity mindset. So it's believing that there's not enough for everyone. So I have to hoard what I have, what I can get. And so that goes back to that community mindset. Like I remember growing up and on Sundays for big meeting, my grandmother would be, frying chicken, making cakes. And, my grandfather would go get, a tub of sodas. And then everybody would open up the bed of their pickup trucks and you go from truck to truck, getting food because we believed that there was enough for everyone. But now when you look at it, people will bring, well, I'm only bringing 20 pieces of chicken to the church. And, if that's not enough, then that's not because we don't have the same mindset that if I put in more, I'm going to get more back. Because there's enough for everybody. We think that, well, I don't have enough for me, so I'm going to keep my best at home and I'm just going to take them what I think that they need. And so it's like a mindset shift that we have to think about is if we believe that God is creator and that God is the source of all good things and everything that's in the world, then why do we not believe that God has created enough for us? Right. If God cares for the trees that grow on the sides of mountains, which is always the most amazing thing to me when I'm driving through Tennessee and I see trees growing on the side of mountains and they don't fall over.
Come on, girl.
We see birds that fly in the air and they don't run into each other. We see plants that bloom at the right time of the year. If God takes care of all of those creatures, why do we not believe that God cares enough to make sure that we have what we need? But God also wants us to take care of God's people. And I tell churches all the time, God does not honor your light bill. God does not honor you redoing your parking lot or your fellowship hall. God honors you taking care of God's people. And I think that when we get back to the mindset of taking care of each other and taking care of community, it's just the fish and the 5 loaves, there was enough. Nobody was sitting around counting well, how many pieces of fish do we have? And, this family can only get 2 pieces because they didn't bring any fish. It wasn't about what anybody brought. There was enough because God cares about God's people. And we have been so consumed with, well, what do I have and how much am I going to get that we forget to take care of each other. And that's why we'll never have enough.
And that, as you're talking, I'm thinking about that. That's why one of the reasons I feel like we have allegiance to capitalism and not allegiance to the cross we say we honor. We just, capitalism pushes the cross over to the side, and capitalism teaches us that you better look out for, what was that movie? Kirk Douglas said greed is good or something like that. I can't remember the movie, but that was and when he said, I thought, dang, and you love that in the movie? You want people to but that's where we are. That's what capitalism does to our minds. It makes us think that the world is all about us, and in reality, it's not about us, it's about everybody else, and we're losing it. I think that I had a meeting with somebody, then they were talking about, there's so many things we don't know about that keep us up underneath the mud as opposed to walking on solid ground. So, when death comes, and it comes, everybody gonna die, so everybody needs to be planning for it. You plan for your wedding, you plan for your baptism for your children. You should plan for your death. You should plan where you're gonna be buried. People don't do that. And they also don't plan, they don't do estate planning.
Right.
Which is so necessary.
Oh, yeah.
People think that if they have a will, then when they die, everything will be fine. But that's not the case, is it? If you don't do estate planning, you could have left your family $100,000, but until that estate planning process is over, your family cannot get access to it, and people don't know about that. Would a good financial planner talk to people about that? And is that a necessary part of building wealth?
Most definitely. So financial planners don't typically do estate planning, but they will refer you to someone. So I would refer my clients to an attorney who would sit down with them. And a lot of times it's creating, trust for, your children, just making sure that all of your documents are in order, making sure that you have like a living will. So, what do you want to have happen to you? Do you want to be resuscitated? Do you not want to be resuscitated? Like, there are a lot of important decisions that also have to be made as you start thinking about end of life, which is like so interesting because, if we truly believe that, we're doing all of this work because we're trying to get to our eternal home, then it's like, well, why don't we spend any time planning for going to our eternal home that we're, so anxious to get to? So that's like a real, kind of like struggle. It's like, well, we say this one thing because it sounds good, but do we really mean it? Because we don't do anything to prepare for it. Even looking at, how much life insurance do you need? So, there are several methods that people use to determine, instead of just buying an arbitrary amount. Like some people will say, like, all right, if I'm going to be working until, I'm 65, then I'll do an income replacement. So that means over the next 20 years, it's projected that I'll make $1 million. So I want to get enough insurance that if I die today, it will replace my income. Some people will say, well, there are, I want to make sure that my church is taken care of. I want to make sure that, my house is paid off. I want to make sure my kids go to college. And so they add up those amounts, and then that's how much life insurance they need. For most people, they'll do like both methods and then land somewhere in the middle to determine the amount that they need. But, just buying like a $10,000 policy right now, funerals cost anywhere from like $10,000 to $20,000. So even $10,000 isn't enough. And then you think about if you have children, or if you're planning to have children, like there's so much that needs to be considered. And then the estate planning comes in. It's like, all right, now that, you have some assets that you've saved, you have some investments, you have life insurance, like how do you want to put those assets in a container so that, probate doesn't take, I think it's like 30-40% that can go in probate taxes if you haven't properly structured your estate. So that's why sitting down with a professional, like they'll go through like all those numbers, all those metrics, and, really help you to think through some difficult decisions. And it's so important, especially if you have young children, as you start to, if you have blended families, it's really important because, you might have made a will like 10 years ago, and then you remarried, and now you have like other children. So you also have to keep those documents up to date, because whatever that last document says is what the court is going to go after, is going to go from. And so you don't want to leave chaos behind, all because like you didn't sit down and have like some hard conversations with your family about what you want the future to look like without you.
And I think, all this stuff is just so rich. If we had in churches, if we, everybody has Wednesday night Bible study. Okay, so that's good. We need to have Thursday night financial management study. It is of God. People don't think it is of God. It is not a good thing to just think that, just to live like you're never going to die, and then you die, and then your family is scurrying around trying to find a way to bury you. I think that's kind of selfish. I think that, and we all do it. So but it's something we need to change, right? It's those habits that we have of thinking that, oh, I'm just going to pray to Jesus. Yeah, you pray to Jesus, but do some estate planning at the same time. Jesus will, Jesus will hear you by and by as you plan for your financial health. And the financial health, I think, is necessary, because if you don't have financial health, you don't have good mental health, you don't have good physical health, you don't have anything. If your finances are jacked up and you're worried, every single day about how you're going to make ends meet. If you don't want to answer the phone, if you don't want to go to the mailbox, you're sick. I mean, you have illnesses. But I think that the church could help that if we would just move away from being afraid of it. So now we're in a different place because of the pandemic. We're all being forced to do church differently, which I think is a good thing. Church is, like Sidney Williams said, it's about being involved in social impact. This is a good social impact thing.
Right.
We as the church, we take the Jesus out. Let's proselytize. Let's do it. But let's also talk about this part of it. Jesus would want us to do this, right? Jesus, okay. Don't you think?
Oh, yeah. And I think that, I would say, like, you can't be a blessing if you need a blessing.
Come on.
So until like we get to the point where, and I think back to like the Acts model of church that we left to hold up, in that model of church, like everybody brought together their resources so that they could feed others. And so those of us who have access to resources, and when I say that, like, that doesn't mean that you have like an extra $1,000 or $10,000. It could just be that you have an extra, $100 at the end of the month. We bring our resources together so that we can go out and feed and educate those who don't have. But it's not just to give them stuff, but it's also so that we can start to change their mindset, because the goal is for people to reach self-actualization where they can take care of themselves. And I think that we spend so much time just doing charity in the church, just because it makes us feel good. Because as long as I'm giving to someone who's in need, I know that I'm in a better position than they are. So we don't want to actually improve their position because it makes me feel good to know that I'm doing better than someone else. When the goal should be, I'm doing good, so I want other people to do good as well. I want to improve their situation in some way. And you'll see that most of the time, people who are in those situations, like, their need is not as great as we imagine them to be. Sometimes, like, they just need a little assistance. Sometimes they just need a change in mindset. Sometimes they just need to do things a little differently or a different opportunity. But we don't do the work of actually trying to impact and change the situation. We just throw some, like the lame man who was at the door, that, people were just throwing money at him. And my question was always, but how long could he actually walk?
Mm-hmm.
Because we don't think about, sometimes people just need a hand up. So how long have people been getting from the system, not because they really needed it, but because they didn't know they could walk on their own?
Come on.
Because it's easier for us to just throw some coins as we're going into the church than for us to stop and say, hey, but what do you really need? What can really help you to get up and walk?
Right.
So we have to ask, how many people have we left at the door that we've just thrown change at, but not to think about, let's stop and have a conversation. Why are you still on Section 8? Because you're a great hairdresser. What if we got you connected with a hair salon so that you can start doing hair?
Right.
You're a drug dealer, but you have great business skills. What if we helped you start a landscaping business so that you can have a legitimate source of income for your family?
Right.
So we have to examine our own internal biases. Is why do we not think that these people that we consider poor or, marginalized, that we can't move them from the margins?
Right.
Versus just throwing coins at them in the margins.
Right.
So that we feel good because we're not.
Yeah, because actually, if you throw money, I'm going to keep trying to catch it. Throwing money does not inspire growth, but somebody taking an interest in you is life-changing.
Yeah.
Somebody stopping to talk to you and look at you in your face and say, what's going on? How can I help you? And investing in you, that is really life-changing, and we don't do that. So what I'm thinking as you're talking, and what I don't think most of us get, is that becoming or building intergenerational wealth is work. Like being a good Christian is work. We want things to be easy. Like having a democracy is work. We don't want to do the work that it takes. Anytime, if you're going to get a loan, and I hate loans, but if you're going to get a loan, they make you fill out, papers until from the Kazoo to the Kazoo. If you don't do it, you ain't getting no loan, right? There's always some preparatory work that you have to do, and some sustaining work that you have to do in being a Christian. You just don't go to church on Sunday and then think it's okay. That's the least part of it. That's a watering station. But the work starts the moment you leave the church, just like being married starts the moment your wedding is over.
Right.
So that'll make you say, well, maybe I shouldn't have known. It's too late now. So, we we have to be willing to do the work. Lakeisha, I could talk to you all night long. There's so many things. The book, everybody, that I'm referring to is Unlynched. Can y'all see it? Let's see.
Yeah.
Unlynched. Okay. And I got mine off Amazon, but if there is a Black bookseller near where you live that you frequent, and you should get it from a Black book owner. Unlynched, an economic empowerment doctrine for African Americans. She's written 20 books. So if you're done with this one, you can read another one and then another one. I am so impressed with how you with all these skill sets that you have, and the way you do it is you do it for the purpose of helping others, and you do that. So I'm just really glad that you are a Micah cohort member, and I'm also glad that you took the time to be with us this evening, and I'm sure we will have you back. I'm hoping that clergy persons that are listening, church people who are listening, and people who are not any of that who are listening will take some of these nuggets and use them, because the time is now. We have lived with a theology of scarcity for a long time. We know better. When we know better, we do better. And so you are helping us to know better. So we should be doing better. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. As we get ready to wind this up, I am going to ask Reverend Jamar Boyd, who is our senior, I always get your title all jacked up, the senior manager of organizational impact, to come on and talk to us for just a second. Hi, Reverend Jamar.
Good evening, everyone. Reverend Womack, thank you very much. You have, I hope everyone who watched tonight and who will tune in later appreciates the wisdom, the content, the depth, and the sincerity in which you communicated it. Thank you, Reverend Sue, for coming up with this concept of Clergy Conversations and shifting it from a thought to a reality, and to creating this engagement in this space every month. I'm really here to ask y'all for some money. That's really why I'm on now, to encourage you to partner with Proctor. We are recreating how we communicate asking for money, Reverend Womack, and it is partnering with Proctor. A lot of people try to figure out, what do y'all do from February to February? And this is what we do. We try to increase and build and sustain the capacity of individuals with the necessary aspects that enable life to go on, whether it's in ministry, whether it's individual, or whether in corporate and congregational settings. Partnership makes that possible. So we're celebrating 20 years. We ask you to consider giving a gift of $20, either this one time tonight, or make it a recurring gift. Or if you can give more, if you can give 200, 2,000, or 20,000, we welcome that contribution as well, because as Reverend Sue has said, and Reverend Womack, we believe in the God of sufficiency. And we believe that in the Proctor Network, in this global world, that God has provided somebody, if not all of us, with everything that is needed to sustain the Sam DeWitt Proctor Conference. So you'll see more things coming out in the days to come about Proctor, partner with Proctor, and how you can do that, especially as we approach the summer, and 2024 is quickly around the corner. I see Mr. Herbert Ponder and a few others on. Thank you for being contributors to Proctor every month, and the consistency in which you do that. So we are greatly appreciative. Reverend Sue, it's back in your hands.
Thank you. You know what, as you were talking, I was thinking about how it's a fascinating story that the March of Dimes, all those millions of dollars that was gathered for March of Dimes, came because the Secretary of State, I think at that time, decided to ask people, just ask for dimes, for research to end polio. And the money kept coming in. Little becomes much when you place it in the master's hands. So a lot of people won't give anything if they think they can give a little, but every little bit is a good investment. And that's the language. We are investing. We are investing in ourselves. We're investing in this organization, and we're investing in the things that we need to have in order to build intergenerational wealth, among other things. So, if you only have 25 cents, shoot, go and send that. It works. It works when everybody is working in concert. That's community. Then we are able to do much. So Reverend Jamar works very hard to, to keep us on the trajectory that we need to be on, and we thank him. But we thank all you for supporting us and making all that we do possible. So thank you, Reverend Jamar. And so Lakeisha, I need to ask your apology because I've been calling you Lakeisha, like, girl, we friends, but
Oh, we are.
I know, but I just, oh my gosh, I just thought, oh, I should, because I like to give uh, credit where credit is due. What's the word I'm looking for? Attribution for what people are. So please forgive me. I'm just talking Lakeisha this, Lakeisha that. But I have the greatest respect for you and your work. I mean, I could sit at your feet, girl, and just listen and learn. I'm just so impressed with what you do and how you share it. So I guess we're done. I guess we're done. I just want to thank you.
We're fangirls, so I feel the same way about you, and I don't care about like titles because that's all God stuff. So
I know that, I just wanted to make sure you know that I know
I
that
appreciate
you're a bad
it.
sister. I just want you to know, okay? Don't want to be in trouble. But no, really, thank you for the amazing work that you do. And like I said, I am sure that we will have you back again to talk about us because we need much education. So God bless you. God bless all of you who are here. God bless. And thank you, Larita and Tiana and Julie and Reverend Jamar and everyone who was listening. Thank you for coming. We'll be back again in a month's time with another conversation. But I hope that you will share this recording with other people, and then we just want people to just listen, and maybe something that was said tonight will strike a nerve that will make, like this book, like reading Willie Lynch's letter made Lakeisha say, I need to write this book. That's what it does. That's what happens when we allow ourselves to learn and grow. So again, thank you everybody. Have a really good evening, and we will see you next time. Take good care. Bye-bye.